President Trump is denying that he made vulgar comments about Haiti, El Salvador, and countries in Africa amid glowing global outrage during an immigration meeting yesterday with a bipartisan group of lawmakers. The president reportedly said, "Why do we want all these people from S-hole countries here? We should bring in more people from places like Norway." Well, after the story first broke, the White House released a statement but did not confirm or deny the remarks. Today, in his only public event, the president ignored questions about them from reporters. But this morning, he did respond on Twitter, writing, "The language used by me at the DACA meeting was tough, but this was not the language used. What was really tough was the outlandish proposal made a big setback for DACA." He went on to say, "Never said anything derogatory about Haitians, other than Haiti is obviously a very poor and troubled country. Never said, take them out." But Democratic Senator Dick Durbin, who was in the meeting, is now speaking out, and he insists the president not only made the vulgar comments, he even repeated them.
As Senator Graham made his presentation, the president interrupted him several times with questions, and in the course of his comments, said things which were hate-filled, vile, and racist. I use those words advisedly. I understand how powerful they are, but I cannot believe that in the history of the White House, in that Oval Office, any president has ever spoken the words that I personally heard our president speak yesterday. You've seen the comments in the press. I have not read one of them that's inaccurate. To no surprise, the president started tweeting this morning denying that he used those words. It is not true. He said these hate-filled things, and he said them repeatedly. When the question was raised about Haitians, for example, we have a group that have temporary protected status in the United States because they were the victims of crises and disasters and political upheaval. The largest group's El Salvador, the second is Honduran, and the third is Haitian. And when I mentioned that fact to him, he said, "Haitians? Do we need more Haitians?" And then he went on when we started to describe the immigration from Africa that was being protected in this bipartisan measure. That's when he used these vile and vulgar comments, calling the nations they come from holes. The exact word used by the president, not just once, but repeatedly. That was the nature of this conversation. When it came to the issue of, quote, chain migration, I said to the president, "Do you realize how painful that term is to so many people? African Americans believe that they migrated to America in chains. And when you speak about chain migration, it hurts them personally." And he said, "Oh, that's a good line." And then when I talked to him about the impact this has on family unification in a nation that values families with the flag as the most important symbols of our future, they scoffed at this notion. It was a heartbreaking moment.
Well, the other 6 lawmakers in the room at the time were all Republican. Senator Durbin commended Senator Graham for pushing back on the comments during the meeting, but none of the others in attendance have commented publicly on the remarks. Joining me now, Sean Sullivan. He's a congressional reporter for the Washington Post. Sean, it was your paper who broke this story, but critics of the president say his comments aren't really a surprise. We know less than a month ago, the New York Times reported that he made disparaging comments about Haitians and Nigerians. What do you make about it this go round?
Well, this is triggering some pretty strong reactions from members of Congress, not just Democrats. We heard obviously there from Senator Durbin, who was on hand for this meeting, but also Paul Ryan recently, I think in the last hour or so, has spoken out against these comments, and I think we can expect to see other Republicans speak out against them as well. I mean, this does, follow a pattern that we've seen from the president, where he has shown a tendency to stoke controversy with, saying things that really do, prompt a reaction, an angry reaction from both Democrats and Republicans. And I think we're starting to see the beginning of that here right now. And a bigger question in the legislative debate is now, what does this do to these very sensitive negotiations over immigration that he was trying to move forward with lawmakers in both parties? It's hard to see something like this, helping those negotiations in any way. So we'll see where they end up.
You talk about Republicans who have come out responding. Senator Orrin Hatch called for more detailed explanation. Senator Tim Scott said that in a statement that if these comments are the president's words, that they're disappointing, to say the least. And then here's House Speaker Paul Ryan. He was asked about them today. I want to play that bite that you mentioned.
The first thing that came to my mind was very unfortunate, unhelpful. But you know what I thought of right away? I thought about my own family. My family, like a whole lot of people, came from Ireland on what they called coffin ships then, came here and worked the railroads. The Irish were really looked down upon back in those days.
So what kind of a sense do you think that these remarks will have, especially on the Republican Party going into midterms?
Well, I think this is something that already we're starting to see Republicans worry about. I mean, when you look at the midterm elections, the president's numbers are in very bad shape right now. He is pretty broadly unpopular. And when you look at history, the first midterm for a new president tends to be not very kind to that president's party. So you've already got historical factors working against the Republicans. You've got Trump's numbers. And now when he comes out and he says controversial things like this, a lot of Republicans believe, this is just the kind of thing that they worry about potentially, moving them to a point where they might lose their majorities in the House, in the Senate, or in both. And so this is just the kind of thing that I think a lot of Republicans look at privately and say, why is the president doing this? We've already got an uphill climb. Let's focus on tax reform. Let's focus on the legislative things we've accomplished. Let's not get into these kind of vulgar comments, these kind of comments that have really struck a nerve in a lot of people, and they wish that he would not talk about this stuff. But as I said, we've seen this as a pattern from the president, making these types of controversial comments over and over again.
Sean, you mentioned those controversial comments in Republicans, and we just got a statement in from Republican Senators Tom Cotton and David Perdue, who were in the room during that immigration meeting. And this is their statement. They said, President Trump brought everyone to the table this week and listened to both sides. But regrettably, it seems that not everyone is committed to negotiating in good faith. In regards to Senator Durbin's accusations, we do not recall the president saying these comments specifically. But what he did call out was the imbalance in our current immigration system, which does not protect American workers and our national interests. We, along with the president, are committed to solving any issues many in Congress have failed to deliver on for decades. So the highlight here, we do not recall the president saying these comments. What do you make of that, Sean?
Well, when you look at Tom Cotton and Senator Perdue, keep in mind that these are two of the strongest defenders of the president. These are two of the more conservative members of the Senate GOP conference. These are two senators that are frequently out there defending the president against criticism, sometimes against criticism from his own party. So it's not surprising to see them rally to his side and essentially defend him in this case. As to whether they recall, what actually was said, well, now it sounds like we're starting to see the beginnings, perhaps, of a debate about what was actually said. But I think it's important to note that they're not denying it. It doesn't sound from the statement that you read that they were necessarily denying this was said. It just sounded like they said they didn't recall it. But again, on the whole, not surprising to see.
But it's kind of hard, Sean, not to recall a statement that we've heard Dick Durbin say. It's not that he said it once. This was repeated multiple times, so it's kind of hard to ignore. So to come out forward and to say suddenly we do not recall the president, when we've heard other senators, Dick Durbin, come forward and say this was said multiple times.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's going to raise a lot of questions. The Senate is gone essentially for the long weekend, but when they get back next week, there's no doubt, they're going to face questions about this when they show up. How could you overlook a comment like this that, has struck a nerve in so many people right now, and that, to a lot of people, they hear, if they heard this in a private meeting, this is not something they would forget or overlook. So that's a great point. They're going to face questions about, if they're saying they don't recall this, how could you not recall something that is such a controversial thing to say?
Sean, I also want to ask you, though, there's another side to this. Democratic Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi coming forward and saying that these comments, this is her words, red meat for his base. I mean, there are undeniably a sector of his population that might believe in the comments he makes. What do you think that might do to his base, to his following?
Well, it'll be interesting to see, today and in the coming days, who comes out and defends him. Is it going to be, a very vocal element of the Republican Party? Is it going to be a minority of the Republican Party? Are most Republicans going to stay quiet? Are some going to try to adopt the tone that, Tom Cotton and David Perdue did, or are we going to see more of what we saw from Paul Ryan? I think the Republican Party is very divided right now when it comes to President Trump. And so, yeah, I think we can expect to see some element of Trump's political base say, look, if he said these things, there perhaps may be some legitimacy to them. On the other side, I think you are going to see more Republicans like Paul Ryan say, well, hold on a second, that's not something anybody should be saying. So I think we're going to see a pretty, big debate potentially come out of this that will show and illustrate how divided the Republican Party is over Trump and how divided they are over the way that he talks and over his rhetoric, not just his policies. And that's something I think we'll see happen and evolve more in the coming days.
And when you look beyond the U.S. borders, the president's comments, the Haitian government summoned the U.S. Official in charge there to explain. The UN Human Rights Office called the remarks racist. The African Union said that they were, and this is their words, frankly alarmed. How do you think how is this going to impact U.S. relations around the globe?
Well, it looks like it could worsen them, and I think this is a worry, an ongoing worry that some lawmakers, again, not just Democrats, but some Republicans have about the president is what are the things that he says, what are the things that he tweets, what are the things that, he says at photo ops or perhaps offhandedly in private conversations. What impact is this going to have, in not just in this country, but as other countries kind of look at the United States as a global leader? And I think when they look at comments like this, it really does make them worry that other countries who have long looked at the United States as a leader, as someone that they could turn to, when they have big issues to deal with internationally, they're looking at this and saying, well, hold on a second. The leader of that country is saying something that is totally at odds with what most of us, if not all of us, believe. And so why should we have a relationship that is the same as it was in the past with the United States? I think that's a worry that lawmakers have when they see something like this. And, as we see from these pretty strong reactions across the globe, this is something that is resonating not just here, but clearly, elsewhere around the world.
When you talk about the impact here on American shores, seeing the president tweet today on DACA, he went to great lengths to say earlier that he had that summit, that meeting in Camp David, and he talked to reporters and he said, I really want to move forward in a bipartisan effort. He let us in this week on immigration talks in a way that no other president has ever let folks in to actually experience that. But he tweeted today that there is a big step backwards today on DACA. Do you think there is a chance, with the clock ticking, of reaching a deal before January 19th?
It's looking less and less likely. I mean, it looked at a point this week that there was perhaps an emerging arrangement, something that both sides could rally around. But then you have what we had yesterday, and you have, the president's vulgar comment in this meeting, and that certainly has rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And I think the backlash to those comments has rubbed Trump the wrong way. So, there's less incentive, it seems like right now, for both of these sides to somehow come together at the table, meet, talk, and somehow come up with a deal before the 19th. That looks very, very unlikely at this point, or at least more unlikely than it did 24, 48 hours ago.
And lastly, we learned last night that President Trump's trip to London has been called off. He says it's because he's not happy with the location of the U.S. Embassy, but the mayor of London made it pretty clear. He said, and this is his words, Donald Trump is not welcome here. What are you hearing about this?
Well, there's a lot of skepticism if you look at social media. People are not buying the president's explanation. When you look at the reception toward Trump in the UK, there have been a lot of people across the political spectrum who don't like him, who don't want him to come visit. And so if he did make a trip, if he were to make a trip over there, you can imagine the protests that would erupt. You can imagine the speeches that politicians would make speaking out against him. It would be a pretty big scene, a pretty big controversy. And so a lot of people, I think, are looking at this, scratching their heads and saying, was the embassy the real reason, or was the real reason that you didn't want to make a trip where you would be received very, very poorly in a country that's supposed to be a close ally of the United States? And that's the debate we're seeing played out.
Sean Sullivan, great of you to join us, Sean. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rena.